Okay, so today we are going to talk about array lists. An array list, let's put that in here. It's a feature of Java, and it's a way of like storing variables and data. So an array list comes from, so an array, just this kind of word right here, it's like a data structure or like a way of structuring data that is native to Java and actually to a lot of other languages. Every language is going to have some form of an array. An array list is basically a fancier version of that someone has created for Java to make it a little bit easier to use. And we have access to this. It doesn't come native to Java, so we do have to import it from a little kind of storage file. But it's something that, like kind of like Scanner, we have to import Scanner. It's not built into Java. But what an array does, or array list, or any array, is basically a way of storing information. And we can think about that in a few different ways. We could think about that as, you could think as like maybe like lockers. I assume at Woodstock or any school you have lockers. So we could think about these as lockers. Each one has and like what are the features of a locker? Well, I mean, okay, you can store things in them. You can put stuff in here. You can put stuff in here. Another important feature is that they have numbers, and they're organized like by increasing values, starting small and increasing. And an array list has kind of the same thing. So in an array list, the difference is we start at 0. Like you might have locker 100, locker 101, 102, 103. An array list works kind of the same way. We start with 0, and then it's locker 0, locker 1, locker 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so on. And just like a locker, in an array, we can keep stuff. We can store stuff in our lockers. The slight difference is that, well, other than that's a code versus an actual like locker, is that in a locker you can put a bunch of different stuff. You can put your backpack, your books, your phone, your trash, your garbage, your food. In an array list, it's only going to take one type of thing. And what that means is you can put integers in there, you can put strings in there, other objects we'll talk about later, but you can't put strings and integers. It's like one or the other. So an array list is set up to take one type of data, not multiple types of data. So that's a really important feature of an array list. Other things, I guess similarities here, like you can put stuff in, obviously, right? Just like a locker. You can also take stuff out. You can add more lockers. You can get rid of lockers. And these are actually two key features here, because I said like an array list is a type of array, but like an array, like the original array that comes with Java, you can't change the size of it. You can't like make it bigger or make it smaller. It's kind of set right away. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But like just be aware that array lists are much more flexible. We can increase the size of an array or decrease the size of an array, which isn't always possible in other. We can increase and decrease the size of an array list. We can't do that with other normal arrays. So why might this be useful? Well, we can, I mean, just like with a locker, you can store stuff in the locker and then you can access it later. So we might do this like if we want to take all the students in class. And I mean, one thing I could do is I could just have some names in here. Like, well, what we could do right now is, well, we'd say like string name 1. And I guess, if I go in alphabetical order, string 1 would be Advite. And I could do like string name 2. Name 2 is going to be Darsh. And I could do string name 3. Like this is what we have so far, right? I think we have Manya up next. And so on and so forth, all the way down till, I guess it looks like Ishpanit would be at the end, blah, 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 and then we say string name 20 is Ish. Boom. There we go. Okay. We can do all that. That's fine. But the problem is, like, if we wanted to, say we store all these names, and then we want to retrieve it later, and we want to figure out, we want to find, like, I don't know, all the students whose last name begins with B. Or we want to find, we just want to retrieve from information. We want to get the first, we want to choose every other student. Or we have this list of students, and then we want to choose a random one from there to, I don't know, have an extra test, or to get a day off. Well, this setup here, like, how are we going to possibly look back through all these names and figure out, like, which one, like, they're all kind of store their own little variables. A much better way to do this is instead of storing these all as separate variables, we could put advite into a locker. Well, we're going to put all of you in a locker. Put Darsh in there. We'll put Manya in there. Well, all the way down, and eventually we're going to Ishpanit in there, and then Sindhar is next. Right? So we'll store everybody in a locker, and then it's like when we go to figure out if we want to go and find like every other locker, then okay, or we want to find every other person, we just go to the lockers and we open up every other one. They're all kind of stored in the same place, and we can access that later. And that's basically what an array list is going to do. It's going to store the data in one place, and then we can look through that array list to retrieve information later. And it's, I mean, we could see this kind of in any, I would say in any program, any like website that you interact with, like it's going to store data that you need to retrieve later. This is the most primitive way that we can store data and then retrieve it later. So there's a lot of stuff to know about like an array list, and I think some of the other videos will cover it. I think there's a cheat sheet video which is going to be super helpful because all of these things, especially these four, there's all different like commands and methods to use these, to put stuff into the locker, to get stuff out of the locker. There's a lot of different ones. To find the size of the lockers, because after we store everybody, we might want to like check the size of the locker. Maybe compare compare the size of the class. Get two classes and compare them and figure out which one's bigger, which one's smaller. We could store numbers in here, and then we could like sort them or find the smallest one, find the biggest one. All sorts of things that we can do when the data is all collected together in something like an array list. So these methods, so all this stuff here, put stuff in, take stuff out, add lockers, get rid of lockers, that's all going to be handled with methods. And actually, let me pop open this video real fast, or this our information. So like if we look at the stock over here, we'll see like this array list cheat sheet. And that's basically what's going on here. This is just a bunch of different methods that are like this, to put stuff in, take stuff out. That's like add, size to figure out how big is the array list, to retrieve something, to get something out, or to remove something, or to check to see if the lockers contain, like for instance, we could do a search of the array list, like if we have all of our students in lockers, and we want to see, is Ritvik in this class? Well, we could search through all the lockers and either return, yes, here he is, or no, he's not here. That would be like this contains method. We could also print out all of the information of everything stored in the array. So if I want to later, like if I've stored all these names into strings, it's going to be really hard to print them all out later. If I have them in an array list, I can just print the whole array list and it'll print out all the information in there. So it's really a super strong way of storing data and then being able to retrieve, modify it, and access it. Okay, so that's the value of an array list. I'm not going to go through all the details of like how do we set one up or all the methods, because I think that's all contained in here. Like when we set this one up, oh, it looks like I need to refresh this to be more accurate. It'll tell us like, this is going to kind of go into what we just talked about, but like declaring array lists, all this stuff we'll go through like the details of that. And so I'm not going to cover that for now. I think that's something that you can read through and kind of make a few other videos about this, but I want to really, array lists are so important, and they will really increase the complexity of the code that you can write by quite a bit.